Book summary. Start with why. Author, Simon Sinek. Chapter 1, Assume You Know. Simon Sinek opens with a provocative example about the power of assumptions. He tells of a 43-year-old man who came to power in his country on a cold January day, amidst the cheers of the crowd. Many would default to thinking this is John F. Kennedy, a common image in American textbooks. But in reality, it was Adolf Hitler in 1933. Just a small change in context completely altered the perception. Sinek uses this example to emphasize, our assumptions shape how we see the world, and if we don't recognize our assumptions, we easily fall into the trap of error. He continues with a story about American automotive executives visiting a Japanese production line. They were surprised not to see Japanese workers using rubber mallets to adjust car doors as they did in America. The Japanese replied, "We designed the car doors to fit from the start." Instead of using tools to fix at the end of the line, they focused on designing the process right from the beginning. This shows a difference in thinking. One side addresses the consequences, the other addresses the cause. Sinek warns that many organizations act based on unverified assumptions, about the market, customers, or themselves. When assumptions are wrong, they can make decisions without knowing it. Even when they achieve good results, they don't understand why, thus cannot replicate success. He gives the example of a friend who trades stocks. When winning, he thinks he's good; when losing, he blames the market. This illustrates a great danger. Random success makes us delusional about our abilities, while failure is attributed to circumstances. We often act based on feelings, the so-called gut feeling. But that feeling doesn't come from randomness, but from an invisible reference system within us, what Sinek calls why. When lacking why, intuition is easily distorted by habits, incomplete data, or performance pressure. And as he asserts, when we don't know why we do something, we easily fall into a state of mechanical action, following what and how, losing the core purpose. Finally, Sinek concludes, organizations and individuals who succeed in the long term are those who start with why, the reason for existence. Understanding why helps us not only avoid false assumptions but also create a sustainable, profound, and reliable direction, just like how the Japanese didn't need the rubber mallet because they designed precision from the start. Chapter 2, Carrots and Sticks. Simon Sinek begins this chapter with an obvious but often overlooked reality: almost no product or service on the market that customers can't find elsewhere with comparable quality, price, service, and features. In that context, many businesses still believe customers choose them because they are better. But in reality, most of them don't know why customers choose them, a worrying fact, because if they don't understand why, they are left with only one path: manipulation. Sinek analyzes that there are only two ways to influence human behavior: manipulation or inspiration. Manipulation, though it sounds negative, is very common and effective in the short term. He lists a series of strategies: price reduction, promotions, instilling fear, appealing to aspirations, creating peer pressure, and introducing novelty. A typical example is Walmart, building an empire with a low-price strategy but at the cost of reputation and credibility. GM also used cashback promotions to boost sales, but when they stopped, sales dropped sharply, because customers had no reason to be loyal beyond immediate benefits. Sinek points out that manipulation is a good tool for one-time transactions, like offering money when someone finds a lost cat. But if an organization wants to build long-term relationships, loyalty, and trust, manipulation is a dead end. A typical example is MyGoldEnvelope.com, a company that buys gold and once invested heavily to enhance customer experience, but found most customers only transacted once. When they shifted to focusing solely on transactions, profits increased. This shows, when only behavior is needed, manipulation suffices, but for loyalty, something deeper is required. In contrast to manipulation, inspiration starts with why, a clear purpose. Sinek emphasizes, Apple doesn't need promotions because they have clearly communicated their reason for existence, challenging the status quo and thinking differently. Apple's customers are not just buyers, they are believers who share the same belief. Sinek also doesn't forget to point out the long-term negative impact of manipulation. increased costs, pressure on both sellers and buyers, and making businesses dependent on short-term fixes instead of building sustainable strategies. He cites the banking industry before the 2008 crisis, a typical example of a system built on manipulation, without trust or a common purpose. The chapter ends with a warning: just because it works doesn't mean it's right. Truly strong organizations don't manipulate to achieve results, they inspire to create engagement and trust, the only thing that can help them overcome long-term challenges. Chapter 3, The Golden Circle. Simon Sinek introduces a simple yet profound model, the Golden Circle, consisting of 3 concentric circles: why, how, and what. This model is not just a communication theory, it is a way to understand human behavior, inspired by the golden ratio in nature, which has been used by Leonardo da Vinci to architects, musicians, and philosophers to find order in chaos. Similarly, the Golden Circle helps us find the pattern in how inspirational leadership works. Most organizations think and act from the outside in. They start with what, the product or service they offer, then how, the process or competitive advantage, and rarely talk about why, the real purpose of existence. Meanwhile, great leaders and organizations do the opposite. They start with why, the core belief. That is the distinction between manipulation and inspiration. Apple is a prime example. If they advertised like other companies, they would say, "We make great computers. Beautiful design, easy to use. Want to buy one?" A bland message. But Apple starts with why: we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We express that by creating beautiful, simple, and user-friendly products. And we happen to make computers. This is why customers are willing to pay more and remain loyal to the brand, not just for the product, but for the values the product represents. Sinek emphasizes that why is not about making money, that's a result, not a cause. Why is the reason a company exists, what makes employees wake up inspired every morning, something that outsiders can feel, not just understand rationally. When an organization clearly communicates why, customers don't just buy the product, they join a shared belief. This model not only explains Apple's success but also why Harley-Davidson has people tattooing their logo, why Southwest Airlines became the most profitable airline, why millions followed Martin Luther King Jr., because they all didn't start with what, they started with why. The chapter ends with a powerful message: it all starts from the inside. Start with why. And when why, how, and what are in harmony, the organization not only becomes authentic but also creates a compelling attraction, something that cannot be copied by function or price. Chapter 4, This is not opinion, this is biology. Simon Sinek asserts that why is not just an inspirational concept but a scientific principle, shaped by the structure of the human brain. The Golden Circle model is not merely a communication strategy, it reflects the 3 layers of the brain: the neocortex, the limbic system, and the primitive brain. The neocortex processes reason, language, and information, corresponding to what. Meanwhile, the limbic brain controls emotions, trust, and most behavioral decisions, corresponding to why and how, but lacks language capability. Therefore, when we communicate from what or how, the listener can understand but is not compelled to act. Conversely, when communicating from why, we speak directly to the decision-making center. That's why Apple's customers can't precisely explain why they love Apple's products, they just know it feels right, because the part of the brain that processes decisions cannot articulate it. Sinek gives the example of traditional advertising campaigns that focus only on features, like detergent brands claiming whiter and brighter, entirely based on what. But anthropological research shows that the first thing people do when taking clothes out of the dryer is sniff them. The feeling of cleanliness is more important than the data on how clean. This proves that consumer behavior is driven by feeling, not by specifications. The disconnect between behavior and the ability to articulate it also makes market surveys difficult. Consumers often rationalize their purchase decisions with logical words, because of the simple interface, because of the beautiful design, while the real reason lies in the feeling of belonging, which only happens when they see their values reflected in the product. Apple, Harley-Davidson, or Martin Luther King, they attract followers because they convey a sense of trust and alignment, not by describing features. Sinek emphasizes that gut decisions don't happen in the stomach, they happen in the limbic brain. And the reason it feels right is because that's the center controlling behavior and emotions. In ambiguous situations, we don't wait for 100% data, we act with about 30 to 80% information, the rest is belief and instinct. In conclusion, Sinek makes it clear, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And this is not philosophy, it's biology. Starting with why is the only way to truly touch the hearts and trust of people, which drives action, loyalty, and inspiration. Chapter 5, Clarity, Discipline, and Consistency. Simon Sinek argues that starting with why is not enough. To inspire and build long-term trust, an organization must maintain clarity about why, discipline with how, and consistency in what. The golden circle model can only be effective when these three elements operate in sync like a balanced ecosystem, just as nature always finds a way to adjust after each imbalance. Clarity about why is the foundation. If you don't know why you exist, everything you do becomes vague and easily replaceable. An organization might say they want to serve customers or create value, but if they can't articulate why in specific, emotional, and inspiring language, employees won't know why they come to work each day, and customers won't know why they should trust you. Discipline in how is the ability to consistently adhere to values and principles of action. How is reflected in culture, processes, systems, the way to realize core beliefs. Sinek warns that many companies hang values like integrity, innovation, communication on the wall, but they are just meaningless nouns. Instead of saying integrity, say always do the right thing. Values must be verbs, measurable behaviors that can be rewarded and maintained. This is the hardest part, maintaining discipline and ensuring the entire organization adheres to how in every action. Consistency in what is tangible evidence of what you believe. Why is the belief, how is the way to realize it, and what is everything you say and do, products, services, communication, personnel. If what you do doesn't reflect why, outsiders won't understand what you believe in. Consistency is where authenticity is created. Consumers don't love Apple products for superior features, but because each product, from iPod to iTunes, consistently embodies the spirit of challenging the status quo, something Apple has demonstrated from day one. Sinek emphasizes that in a world flooded with messages and noise, consistency is the beacon. When every action and statement revolves around why, the brand becomes clear, trustworthy, and hard to replace. And only when the golden circle is operated in the correct order, from why to how to what, can the organization truly inspire deeply and sustainably. Chapter 6, The Emergence of Trust. Simon Sinek asserts that trust is not accidental, nor can it be created simply by words or performance reports. It is the result of consistency, sincerity, and shared belief. Trust does not arise from products or services, but from why, the organization's reason for existence, clearly expressed and lived every day. Sinek illustrates this with the story of Herb Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines. When asked who comes first, shareholders or employees, Kelleher unhesitatingly replied, "Employees come first." Because if employees are treated right, they will treat customers well, and customers will return, making shareholders happy. For Kelleher, this is not a paradox, it is the essence of a trustworthy organization. At Southwest, trust comes not just from words but from specific actions. They do not have a customer is always right policy and are willing to refuse customers if they insult employees. This is how the organization protects internal trust before extending it outward, creating an environment where employees feel respected and are thus willing to give their all. Sinek also emphasizes the role of organizational culture in nurturing trust. Culture is the safety net for creative and risky behaviors, like the net under a circus performer. When people know they are supported and trusted, they are willing to take risks for the common good, surpassing personal limits to contribute to the whole. Trust also stems from value alignment. Sinek asks, who would you trust more, a friend you know or a stranger with more experience? When hiring a babysitter, we choose someone from the neighborhood, not because of a better resume, but because we feel they are like us in beliefs and background. This is evidence that trust is based on cultural alignment, not just data. Sinek concludes that trust is the foundation for all long-term relationships, between people, between employees and the organization, and between customers and the brand. When an organization lives true to its why, it not only attracts the right people but also creates an environment for them to engage, grow, and contribute. And only then does the organization truly become a strong community, not merely a system operating for profit. Chapter 7: How a Tipping Point Tips. Simon Sinek begins this chapter with a paradox. TiVo, a great technology product, excellent PR, strong brand recognition, but failed in the market. The reason? They promoted what they do, not sharing their reason for existence, why. They overlooked a core principle, the law of diffusion of innovations. Sinek presents this theory, first introduced by Everett Rogers in 1962, later expanded by Geoffrey Moore in Crossing the Chasm. Society is divided into 5 groups: innovators, 2.5%, early adopters, 13.5%, early majority, 34%, late majority, 34%, and laggards, 16%. New ideas only become trends when they cross the chasm between early adopters and the early majority, known as the tipping point. Why is this important? Because if you don't cross the initial 15 to 18% of the market, you will never reach the masses. But the key point is, those on the left side of the curve, innovators, early adopters, don't buy products for features, but for belief. They see the product as an extension of their own identity. For example, the first people to line up for the iPhone or pay $40,000 for a flat-screen TV, not for features, but because they want to be pioneers. Sinek emphasizes that to make the system tip, organizations cannot target the masses from the start. That's a costly and ineffective strategy. Change doesn't start from the center, it starts from belief spreading from the fringes. When enough believers are willing to tell your story, you create a movement. Apple did this with the iPod, not just by advertising the product but by expressing why they exist, to innovate and challenge norms. The case of TiVo shows the opposite lesson. Despite having a superior product, they chose to communicate from what, ignoring the innovators, and as a result, never reached the tipping point. They failed because they didn't tell customers why they exist, why they should care. In conclusion, Sinek asserts, to make an idea spread, organizations must patiently and consistently communicate why. Not trying to manipulate someone to buy, but inspiring someone to believe, so they voluntarily become spreaders. And only then does the idea become a movement, automatic, sustainable, and profound. Chapter 8: Start with why, but know how. Simon Sinek emphasizes that inspiration is not enough to create a great organization. Inspiration is the spark, but to turn it into concrete results, you need fuel. That's how. Why is the belief, but without people who know how to bring that belief into reality, everything remains a dream. He introduces a way to visualize the 3 golden circles as a 3-dimensional cone: why at the top, where the leader inspires, how in the middle, representing the execution team, and what at the base, what customers see, products, services, actions. Sinek provides a vivid example with Walt and Roy Disney. Walt, the great dreamer, believed he could bring joy to people through imagination. But it was Roy who knew how to turn that vision into reality, building the financial and operational systems for Disneyland to exist. Similarly, Jobs was Apple's why, while Wozniak was how, the one who realized Jobs' technological vision. Sinek explains that how is not just processes but operational values, shaping culture and internal behavior. How must be highly disciplined because it binds the organization to its original purpose. At Apple, how is simplification, reflected in design, packaging, and user experience. Steve Jobs didn't directly create every detail, but he inspired the team to know how to realize why through how. A great inspirational leader needs to find how to people, those willing to put the organization's belief on the table every day and turn it into concrete actions. From Dr. King with Ralph Abernathy, from Gates with Allen, from Jobs with Ive, each why type needs a how type to maintain structure and make belief measurable and repeatable. Sinek concludes, starting with why inspires change, but only with how is that change sustained and expanded. When why and how combine seamlessly, the organization not only has a vision but also a roadmap. And only then can you build an organization that inspires, not just for customers but for those within. Chapter 9, Know Why. Know How. Then what? Simon Sinek opens the chapter with an iconic image, Apple's 1984 advertisement. In a bleak, uniform, mechanical, and propagandistic setting, a woman appears with a hammer, throwing it at the giant screen representing oppression. It was not just an ad for the Macintosh computer, it was a declaration of Apple's reason for existence, why to challenge the status quo, empower individuals, and ignite creativity. Sinek emphasizes, why does not change over time. What Apple does, from computers to iPods or iTunes, may change, but why they do it does not. Everything Apple says and does, from store design to advertising, from product interface to hiring, are what's born from their why. This creates authenticity, making others trust them. Conversely, Sinek gives the example of Dell. When Dell launched MP3 players or handheld devices, consumers didn't know why Dell was doing it, because the company didn't have a clear why that the public could perceive. As a result, those products were not seen as authentic and failed to create an emotional connection. Sinek explains that in the three-dimensional golden circle model, the cone, why is the tip, the leader, how is the strategic managers, and what is all outward actions. If you start with what, you're just doing work. But if you start with why, then how, and then what, you're inspiring, creating real value. The profound difference lies in the sequence. If an organization chases what first, they easily fall into following market trends without direction. A product may be good, but if it doesn't reflect why, it's just a commodity. But if the product is born from a clear why and executed with the right how, it is a living testament to belief, and consumers will feel it. Sinek concludes, everything you say and everything you do has to prove what you believe. If you know why you exist and know how you act, how, then what you create, what, will be authentic, inspiring, and sustainable over time. That's the only way for an organization not just to survive but to shape a movement. Chapter 10, Communication is not about speaking, it's about listening. Simon Sinek begins the chapter with a symbolic image, Martin Luther King Jr., not someone shouting slogans or presenting a detailed action plan, but someone who connected a generation through belief. His I have a dream speech was not I have a plan. His power lay in listening to the unspoken aspirations and speaking them in a language that touched people's hearts. According to Sinek, effective communication doesn't start with speaking, it starts with understanding what the listener feels and believes. When an organization communicates why, the important thing is not to use grand words but to create the feeling that the listener is understood. For example, Apple doesn't advertise by listing features but by conveying belief, think different. Customers hear it and respond with the feeling, I think that way too. It's an emotional dialogue, not mere marketing. Sinek calls this the megaphone, the organization's signal transmitter. Every action, product, message, is the sound wave emitted from that megaphone. But if the message is unclear, the listener won't understand what the organization believes in. He emphasizes, we don't buy what you do, we buy why you do it. And if you don't listen enough to understand what your community believes, you'll never connect with them. A vivid example is the celery test. When you buy everything others recommend, M&Ms, Oreos, rice milk, celery, no one knows what you believe in. But if you only buy celery and rice milk, true to your health belief, others will see clearly what you stand for. Proper communication is when what you do proves why you believe, and from that, others recognize they share the same belief. Finally, Sinek emphasizes that an organization wanting to inspire must know how to listen to the community they want to serve, not to change themselves according to tastes, but to understand how to convey their why to touch the beliefs of like-minded people. Because only when people feel understood will they be willing to accompany you, not for you, but for themselves. Chapter 11, When Why Goes Fuzzy. Simon Sinek starts the chapter with a familiar but often overlooked warning. As organizations grow, they easily forget their original why, the foundation of inspiration and differentiation. He emphasizes that material success, what, and organizational skills, how, can develop over time, but if not accompanied by clarity and maintenance of why, the organization will gradually lose direction. Sinek recounts the cases of Dell and Walmart, brands once beloved for their clear purpose. Dell initially created a connection with customers through personalized service, a manifestation of why tied to utility and efficiency. But when they shifted to focusing entirely on low prices, they lost the emotional connection with customers, and trust gradually disappeared. Similarly, Walmart was once a symbol of closeness, community service, and savings for American workers. Sam Walton, the founder, was the living embodiment of that belief. But after his death, the organization no longer had a clear replica of why to carry on, leading to chaos, from labor scandals, loss of community trust, to the indifference of employees themselves. Sinek describes this phenomenon with the image of the split. Initially, what and why go hand in hand, because the team is small, passion is still close. But as the organization grows, decision-making is gradually delegated and dominated by data, profits, processes, thus, why is no longer the center, and when the internal signal fades, the external message also becomes unclear. He introduces a symbolic rule, the school bus test: if the founder disappears tomorrow, will the organization still retain why? The answer is no, unless why has been separated from the individual and ingrained in the organizational culture. Finally, Sinek emphasizes, success comes when you are clear in pursuit of why you want it. Achievements can be measured by money, market share, awards. But true success comes from the feeling that you are still living and acting for what made you start. If the organization does not actively maintain why, no matter what they achieve, inspiration and loyalty will no longer exist. Chapter 12, Split Happens. Simon Sinek describes the split as a dangerous but inevitable phase in the development of organizations, when why and what no longer go hand in hand. When the business is small, why and what often accompany each other closely. The founder is present every day, inspiring directly. But as the organization expands, adding more levels and performance pressure, why gradually fades, while what increases in volume, that's when the split occurs. Sinek presents a dual graph image. The what curve, results, revenue, products, rises steadily, but the why curve, purpose, mission, fades if not carefully protected. This separation causes the organization to lose inspiration from within and trust from outside. People come to work just to meet targets, no longer building the cathedral as they did before. He cites Dell as an example, once making waves with the purpose of democratizing technology, making powerful computers accessible and affordable for everyone. But when Michael Dell left the company, why was not clearly maintained. Dell pursued short-term profits, management lacked transparency, leading to financial reporting fraud, market share loss, and reputation decline. Michael Dell had to return to redirect the organization back to the original why. A similar situation occurred at Starbucks when Howard Schultz stepped back. The company grew rapidly, neglecting customer experience, and fell into crisis. Schultz returned, not to save sales, but to restore identity, making Starbucks the third place between home and work, the spirit that once made the difference. Sinek argues that the biggest challenge for organizations is not failure, but success. When success comes, decisions are increasingly based on data rather than belief. Initially, the founder trusted intuition. But later, the organization relied on what's right according to reports. They forget why they started. And then, the split becomes a cultural crisis. In conclusion, Sinek warns, if why is not kept at the center, the organization will slide along inertia, becoming a shadow of itself. Only when leaders transmit why into culture, independent of individuals, can the organization maintain sustainable strength, whether the founder is still there or not. Chapter 13, The Origins of a Why. Simon Sinek opens the chapter with a clear assertion: why is not something we create, but something we discover. It doesn't come from market surveys, future plans, or strategic meetings. Why is formed from the past, from personal experiences, from deep values that have shaped us into who we are. He gives the example of himself. After 3 years of entrepreneurship, Sinek gradually lost connection with his passion. Work became a burden. He no longer proudly declared, "I am an entrepreneur," as in the beginning. Despite having big clients and good services, he felt exhausted, confused, and empty. Then, he realized, the problem was not the work, but that he had forgotten his why. Thanks to a friend, Victoria, who introduced him to the limbic brain and the role of emotions in behavior, Sinek began to research deeper into brain biology. From there, the golden circle model was born, but initially just a small experiment with no practical application. It wasn't until Sinek looked back at his personal journey, from childhood, from friends, from school days, he saw a common thread: he was always the one inspiring others to believe in themselves. And that is his why, to inspire others to do what inspires them. He calls this the friend's test. Ask loved ones, friends, what makes you special? How do you inspire others? From that, you will see your why lies not in skills, but in the core value you bring to others. For Apple, why came from Jobs and Wozniak's rebellious youth in Northern California, where belief in the individual and resistance to centralized power created the think different spirit. Why is like a bow: to make the arrow powerful, you must pull it back 180 degrees. Similarly, to have a strong why, you must look back at yourself, turn back time, find the real starting point for everything you do. Sinek concludes, when you know your why clearly, everything you do, from work to relationships, will become a living expression of that belief. You don't just create results, you create meaning. And when you live with why, you not only inspire others, you also ignite transformation within yourself. Chapter 14, The New Competition. Simon Sinek closes the book with a new definition of competition: the race is not with others, but with yourself. The story of Ben Cummin, a cross-country runner with cerebral palsy, is a perfect metaphor. Ben doesn't win races, doesn't beat opponents, but he is the only one whom everyone comes back to run with after the race ends, because he runs not to defeat others, but to surpass himself. Sinek asks, why in business are we always obsessed with being better than others? Better in price, better in features, better in service. But the more we chase others, the more we lose our why. And when an organization loses why, they lose their differentiation, lose the reason for customers, or employees, to stay. He calls for a reverse mindset: wake up every day with the goal of being better than yourself yesterday. This week better than last week. This product better than the previous one. Not because of what competitors do, but because we want to leave the organization in a better state than when we found it. Apple is a prime example. Instead of hunting down every move of competitors, they focus on keeping their why, think different, clear. Every new product, from iPod to iPhone, embodies that belief. They don't ask, how to beat Microsoft, but how to continue challenging the status quo. Sinek presents a thought-provoking scenario: if you answer the question, why should I buy from you instead of competitors? With, because what we're doing today is better than what we did 6 months ago, and in 6 months it will be even better, then you're not just inspiring, you're speaking with belief. If customers believe what you believe, they will go with you, not because you're better, but because you reflect who they are. He concludes, the real competition is not to win customers, but to maintain loyalty to why. When an organization is loyal to why and continuously improves, they don't need to chase the market will come to them.